Hello, my name's Suvannavira, and welcome to this second video of our course. Our theme being Going for Refuge. Going for refuge, the three jewels, meaning to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. In our first video, we looked at the meaning, the literal meaning of going for refuge. We looked at the original meaning in the Pali Canon, the scriptures closest to giving an account of the historical Buddha himself. And we looked at the experiences that we had, the experiences evoked of people who went for refuge in the time of the Buddha. We saw how the words going for refuge came to have a central place in the Refuges and Precepts. The Refuges and Precepts being the most widespread ritual in the Buddhist world. And we chanted the Refuges and Precepts together. Now, in the second video, we'll continue looking at the meaning, we'll continue exploring the meaning of going for refuge. As we saw in the course on the teaching on ethics, in Buddhism, teachings often come in pairs, a positive aspect and a negative aspect. The positive aspect meaning what we are trying to do, what we are trying to develop. The negative aspect, what we're trying not to do, trying to stop doing, or at least reduce doing. So here, going for refuge is our positive aspect. Raises a question, what is the negative aspect, if there is one? What comes in a pair with going for refuge? Well, going for refuge goes together with going forth. Going forth from home into homelessness. Going forth was an important event in the life of Siddhartha Gautama. Siddhartha Gautama, the Buddha to be. Because he went forth, the scriptures tell us, when he was 29 years old. He gained enlightenment 6 years later, when he was 35. Only then did he become the Buddha. A question for you to share in our groups on Telegram or WhatsApp. Do we have to literally go forth? What do you think? For once, I'm going to answer my own question. And I'm going to say, I don't consider that we need to take it literally. What do we need to go forth from? We need to go forth from that which holds us back in spiritual life. That which holds us back at this particular moment in time, in our particular circumstances. we go forth to be free to make our own choices, our individual choices, to go for refuge, we need to be free to go for refuge. And the question for you again, what do you think comes first? Going forth or going for refuge? At the beginning, we go for refuge, maybe without clearly knowing what we're going for refuge to. Maybe it's a vague sense of deeper meaning, or that our present life doesn't have a real meaning. And on that basis, we go forth. We leave behind what doesn't have real meaning. If we find our new goals are embodied by the three jewels, we can go for refuge to them. And maybe that becomes the basis for future going forward. So going for refuge and going forth go together. They reinforce each other. And one last question for the moment. When I talk to people about Buddhism, they often mention Siddhartha's going forth as the first thing sometimes they say about Buddhism. It often disturbs them. It's something they don't understand. So my question for you is, how does Siddhartha's, the Buddha's to be going forth, make you feel? Does it worry you? Does it inspire you? Does it give you a sense of freedom and open possibilities, or something else? Since going forth was such an important part of Siddhartha's life, a key event, a turning point on the path to enlightenment, let's look in a little more detail on going forth and the causes of his going forth, since it was a controversial aspect of his life. Let's look at the causes of his going forth so as to understand it better. Siddhartha Gautama, the Buddha to be, was born a prince. He lived in luxury. He had riches. Although we're told he lived a sheltered life. Nonetheless, he was married. He got married and had a child. But one day, outside the palace, riding in a chariot with his chariot driver, we are told, he saw an old man. Maybe saw an old man as if for the first time. It was a deep shock. He asked himself, what is the meaning of life if we grow old? And on another day, He saw a sick man. Another shock. What is the meaning of life if we get sick? And again, he saw a corpse. Maybe this was the biggest shock of all. What is the meaning of life if it ends in death? We're told he started to reflect. Why? Being subject to death? Do I strive for that which is also subject to death? What if I were to strive for the deathless? And once again, on another day, he was outside the palace in his chariot with his chariot driver. And he saw a wandering ascetic who was searching for truth. He'd given up the world to search for truth. He'd gone forth. These four events collectively are known as the four sights. And Siddhartha, the Buddha to be, knew what he had to do. He knew he too had to go forward. And a question for you, which I won't answer. What's the significance of life in the face of death? What is the meaning of your life in the context of death? What's your personal answer? So, a little later on the night of the full moon, he took one last look at his wife and child as they lay sleeping and rode away on horseback from the palace. Mythic accounts tell us how the gods opened lotus flowers under the horses' hooves so they wouldn't make a sound and wake anybody up, so as not to give the young prince away. When he got to the edge of his kingdom, he dismounted. He left his horse. He shaved off hair and beard, gave away his prince's clothes, and donned the rag robes of a wandering mendicant. He literally went forth from home into homelessness, leaving behind family, social position, wealth, comforts like good food and fine clothing, and security. And he became a wandering ascetic, living on alms and wearing rag robes, searching for truth, striving for the deathless, seeking enlightenment. The three words, the truth, the deathless, enlightenment, are synonyms. So what happened next? Well, that's a story for another time. Enough to say here that 6 years later, after 6 years of struggle, he gained enlightenment. And a question for us: what holds us back on a spiritual path? What do we need to go forth from, to go for refuge more deeply, to have the choice to go for refuge, the chance of making an individual choice? Look forward to reading your replies. But do we really want to go forth? Do we really want to go for refuge more deeply? How motivated are we really? These are important questions. So let's look in more detail at why to go forth. Why go for refuge? And to do this, let's look at another pair of words: dukkha and shraddha, the Sanskrit versions. In Pali, dukkha and saddha. Let's look at dukkha first. Another famous word in Buddhism. It's sometimes translated as suffering. People can get the impression Buddhism teaches that all life is suffering. But this is a mistake. Rather, Buddhism teaches that suffering is inevitable, even if life is very pleasant now. As we saw with the young prince Siddhartha, when he saw the four sights, he saw we will get sick, we will grow old, we will die. In other words, suffering is inevitable. And not just at the end of life. An image of dukkha is a cart with an ill-fitting wheel. We might get to where we want to go, but it's uncomfortable. And nothing we can do seems to make it any better. Maybe not even meditating. So, how to translate dukkha? Well, it's not so much that life is suffering, as life is unsatisfactory. Better to translate dukkha as unsatisfactoriness. And an awareness of dukkha can motivate us to go forth, to find our equivalent, on the basis of our equivalent of the wandering ascetic, searching for truth, our equivalent of the fourth sight. Question for you: what are your sources of dukkha? What are your sources of unsatisfactoriness? And is there even anything free from dukkha? Now we'll come to the second word, our second word. So our second word in Sanskrit, Shraddha, in Pali, Sada. And it's another word that requires a little bit of care in translation. It's sometimes translated, Shraddha is translated as belief. But again, this has problems. What's wrong with belief? Well, in Christianity, belief is very important. It's fundamental. What you believe is what, it's by your beliefs that you are a Christian. And there's a danger of bringing the same attitude into Buddhism. Buddhism's clear, it doesn't ask for blind belief. Blind belief is belief in something beyond your experience. Rather, Shraddha grows as our experience of practice deepens. We come with Buddhism, we're asked to come with a provisional attitude. Try it and see. More about this in the next video. So rather than belief, we could translate Shraddha as faith, or even confidence, or leave it untranslated. But what is Shraddha? We could say it's a positive emotional response to the truth, or even to the deathless, to the transcendental. When Siddhartha saw the wandering ascetics searching for truth, and he knew what he had to do, his response was Shraddha. When he thought, why don't I strive for the deathless? His response was Shraddha. Do you have any experience of Shraddha? In what do you have Shraddha? Would you like to tell us about it? I'd certainly like to hear. And dukkha and Shraddha, unsatisfactoriness and faith, form another pair. Something negative, something positive, once again. But what can we do? Is it enough to try and avoid dukkha? And kind of decide somehow, oh, I'm going to have some Shraddha. It's not that simple. Escapism doesn't work. And being asked to experience Shraddha is a bit like Miss Havisham asking Pip to play in Great Expectations. Pip couldn't play in Great Expectations when asked to do so. So what can we do? We'll see. The key thing here is that Buddhism teaches that Shraddha arises in dependence on dukkha. In a teaching called the spiral path. And the spiral path that is an example of positive conditionality. We've come a long way in a few words. Let's unpack all of that a little bit and start at the beginning with the question, what is conditionality? Be it negative or positive conditionality. Buddhism teaches that everything in phenomenal existence, in conditioned existence, arises in dependence on conditions. Be it an object arising or a mental event arising. That's why it's called conditioned existence. Furthermore, when the conditions are no longer there, the object or mental event also ceases to be there. It's the law of universal conditionality. In Sanskrit, it's called pratitya samutpada, which Sangharakshita translated as conditioned co-production. And conditioned co-production is identified as a central teaching in Buddhism, at least from the philosophical point of view. Pratitya samutpada is a general law which can have specific applications. And one application, conditioned co-production, is the 12 nidanas, the 12 links, which describe the process of birth and death and rebirth. It's these 12 links that bind us to conditioned existence. And it's a very significant teaching. The 12 nidanas, the teaching on the 12 nidanas, is one of the formulations of what the Buddha realized on the night of his enlightenment. A question for you to explore the idea of conditions. What are the different conditions in your life now? How have they changed over time? And how do these conditions affect you? And secondly, more philosophically maybe, what's the difference between conditionality and causality? For now, we'll only look at 2 links out of the 12 nidanas, out of the 12 links. We'll look at 2 links that occur roughly in the middle of the list of links. Our first is feeling. Our second is craving. So, being a conditioned list, we can say that craving arises in dependence on feeling. Better to expand a little. Feeling can be pleasant, painful, or neutral. From pleasant feeling, craving arises. Craving arises when we want the pleasant feeling to continue. From painful feeling, hatred arises. Broadly speaking, hatred is when we want something to stop, We don't want it. From neutral feeling, ignorance arises. We don't really know what we want. But there's good news. There's a gap between feeling and craving. When we don't react with craving to feeling, we stay in the gap. When we just stay with the feeling, when we don't react with hatred to unpleasant feeling, when we don't react with ignorance to neutral feeling, we stay in the gap. And spiritual development really starts here, staying in the gap. We change our relationship to our experience. But we'll leave the 12 nidanas just for a moment. We'll leave staying in a gap just for the moment and have a look at the 12 stages, the stages of the spiral path. If you like, the positive nidanas. The negative nidanas bind us to the wheel of life. The positive nidanas lead us away from conditioned existence, to the unconditioned. The unconditioned being another synonym for truth, the deathless, the transcendental. And a spiral path is the positive counterpart. The spiral path is a teaching that had been forgotten in modern Eastern Buddhism. Sangharakshita rediscovered it and realized its importance. The teaching of the spiral path lays out the stages that the mind goes through as it frees itself from conditioned existence. It lays out the different states of mind we inhabit as we make progress on the path to enlightenment. So a very significant teaching for us. And what is the first stage on the spiral path? Well, it's dukkha, showing why it's so important to be aware of our unsatisfactoriness we experience. And dukkha arises when we stay in the gap. Friend, the gap between feeling and craving. Dukkha arises when we stop trying to get what we want constantly. Dukkha arises when we stop trying to avoid not getting what we don't want. Dukkha and in dependence on dukkha arises shraddha. When we stay with our dukkha, when we stay in the gap, we can get a glimpse of something beyond. We can get a glimpse of something with greater meaning, giving real and deep satisfaction. A glimpse of the transcendental even. In this way, dependence on dukkha, we experience shraddha. If you don't believe me, try it and see. And what happens in dependence on Shraddha? Well, joy arises. We find real meaning, deep satisfaction. It gives us joy. So that's how the spiral path starts. Dukkha, Shraddha, and joy. Continues a long way, but that's enough for now. So, when we stay in the gap, when we allow ourselves to experience dukkha, which isn't necessarily simply painful feeling, but the unsatisfactoriness of our existence, of our normal existence, we start to see our normal existence as a false refuge, something that doesn't really give us what we want. And when we start to experience Shraddha, when we get the taste of the real possibility of a meaningful life, of genuine satisfaction, lasting satisfaction, when we get a taste, getting what we really deeply need for such a life, we begin to see true refuges. But that isn't how most people see things, not how most people understand things, not how most people understand life. They see the false refuges as true and chase after them, and don't see the true refuges at all. A question for you: what have been false refuges for you? What are false refuges for you now? And a second question that I'll answer right away: how can we see things more clearly? How can we see the false refuges as false? How can we see the true refuges and as true? This will be what I'll talk about right now. So we see the false refuges as true, and the true refuges as false, or maybe not see the true refuges at all. This is called, in Sanskrit, michaditis. These are wrong views. And again, seeing the false refuges as false, seeing the true refuges as true, or even just seeing the true refuges, it's an example of having right views. This is seeing things according to the Dharma. So a question for reflection: how can we overcome wrong views? How can we see things according to the Dharma? To understand this, our first task is to understand why we have wrong views. We have false views because of our vision. Vision being our capacity to see ourselves, others, and the world. We have false views when our vision is weak, limited, and distorted. Our vision is weak when it isn't supported by a concentrated state of mind. A concentrated state of mind which we develop in meditation. Our vision is weak when it's our vision. We have wrong views when our vision is limited to what we receive through the senses, limited to what's in front of our noses, to knowledge from our friends and family, from our culture and civilization, or even our group within a particular culture and civilization. Our vision is distorted by thoughts and emotions. Our thoughts being worldly theories and philosophies, ideas that don't correspond to reality, and distorted by emotions, negative emotions, sometimes even positive emotions. We think everything is terrible, but everything is wonderful. So these are the causes of our wrong views. These lie behind our wrong views. You see, with right views, meaning to see ourselves, others, and the world truly. Well, to begin with, we need to know what right views are. To see according to the Dharma, we need to know the Dharma intellectually. But to see it more deeply, we need vision which is strong, broad, and clear. Our vision is strong when it's powered by a concentrated state of mind. A concentrated state developed through meditation, allowing our vision to be deep and penetrating. Our vision is broad when we draw upon the whole range of human experience from all cultures and civilizations, as well as meditative experience beyond the senses. Our vision is clear when it is direct, based on direct experience, without intermediaries of ideas, the intermediaries of emotions, positive or negative. So right views, living according to the Dharma, depends on our vision being strong, broad, and direct, and clear. Our vision, when it's fully developed, can be considered perfect vision. When we see things constantly according to right view, constantly see things according to the Dharma, our vision is perfected. But we can get a glimpse, even now, of perfect vision. Often a momentary glimpse, like a flash of lightning that lights up the world around us, that lights up the landscape around us. A flash of lightning that for a moment allows us to see the truth, see the deathless, the transcendental, the unconditioned. A question for you: have you had any flashes of perfect vision? Even for instance, I'd appreciate hearing about them. And it's important to remember them, so they continue to motivate us. So we've come to perfect vision, which allows us to see with the perfect vision, which allows us to see the right views, which allows us to see correctly about what a false refuge is and what a true refuge is. Perfect vision that helps us recognize dukkha. Perfect vision that sees with shraddha. Deepening vision allows us to be more motivated to grow and go forward and go for refuge, and go for refuge ever more deeply. What are the stages of deepening going for refuge? What are the levels of deepening going for refuge? That will be the subject of our next video. And until then, I wish you courage in seeing dukkha as dukkha, and wishing you the arising of shraddha.